ready to start. All right, good evening, Finland, and good morning, LA. My name is Reetta Turula, and I have the honor to welcome you to our third part of the XYZ Masterclass series on behalf of Business Oulu, Film Tampere, City of Helsinki, and Audiovisual Producers Finland. Today we talk about directing, and I am really excited about this session because we have great speakers joining us, and of course, our wonderful moderator from XYZ Films, co-founder and producer of the company, Aram Tersakian. I'll let you introduce our speakers soon. So first one, notice to our listeners. So please keep your mics and cameras off. And if you have anything to ask, just use our chat. The questions will be handled during Q&A part at the end of the session. Okay, I think we're good to go. So Aram, you can run the show from now on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Retta. First of all, I want to thank, as you mentioned, I want to thank Film Tampere, City of Tampere, City of Oulu, Business Oulu, Helsinki, and AppFi for making this masterclass series possible. We've had a really good time doing the first couple, and today feels like a real all-star team. We have some amazing panelists who I'm very humbled, honored, and grateful to say I've had the opportunity to work with personally, recently and going forward on projects. So would love to start off with just having each panelist introduce themselves because they'll do a better job than I possibly could. And from there, we'll start diving into some group questions, specific questions, and hopefully find a very entertaining 90 minutes for everybody in the audience to learn a little bit more about these individual adventures on filmmaking pursuits, and hopefully they can be helpful for everybody watching to learn their own kind of path and make their own adventure. So without further ado, let's start with, why don't we start with Karin. Karin, if you could take a minute just to talk about who you are as a filmmaker, as a human being, and where you are, and then we'll pass it off to Joe and then Riley.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Karin Kusama. I'm a director. Sometimes I write as well, and I live in Los Angeles, and I've been making features and directing television for now crazily over 20 years, and have done both studio films and very small indie films, and just continue to try and figure out the film landscape as it evolves and changes, and where I can find myself in it. But that's who I am.
All
Great,
right.
thank you.
I'm Joe Penna. I also living in Los Angeles right now, but I'm from Brazil originally, and yeah, I got started on YouTube with a YouTube channel where I did a lot of animation and stop motion, a lot of music videos. And yeah, I've done 2 feature films so far that have been released. One called Arctic, that thankfully we got played at the Cannes Film Festival, and the other one called Stowaway, which just came out on Netflix. Both of those with XYZ Films. So yeah, I think I'm sorry, Aram, I've been trying to learn my Finnish, but I've only got a few phrases down. I've got Jeven Polka down, and that's just about it. I think this is gonna have to be in English.
Well, it is technically the hardest language in the world to learn, as I've learned the hard way. So whatever you've got is already a little bit more than I've got, and I've been to the country about 30 times.
Yeah, Joe, I was in Finland for 3 months and I learned 3 words. So
I don't feel so bad.
Yeah.
One of them was about a dachshund, right, Riley?
Yeah, Mairo Kero Paira, something like that. Yeah, that's a dachshund. Sort of. I probably butchered it because it's been a while, but yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Riley Stearns. I'm a writer and director, and I live in Los Angeles. I've made 3 features now, or I'm currently in the process of finishing up the 3rd one. I've made a film called Faults in 2013, a film called The Art of Self-Defense that came out in 2019. And now I've got Duel, which I made with XYZ Films in Finland, in Tampere, this last fall. And yeah, like I said, I'm finishing that right now, and we've got 2 more weeks to go, and then we are all done and feeling great.
Excellent, thank you. And Riley will obviously touch on your experience in Finland further down the line during this panel, but thank you guys for the wonderful introductions. So just to kick it off on a really broad level, our audience today it's a diverse group, but it's primarily people who are studying film, who are working as film professionals. Many are filmmakers and many are aspiring filmmakers. So, you know, the first question I want to start with is, what inspired each of you to be a filmmaker, and what were your first steps in terms of getting there? You know, if you can think that far back, when was the moment you realized this is what you wanted to do, and what were the active steps and proactive steps you took in starting to make that, I guess, dream a reality? Riley, let's go first with you this time.
Okay, great. I mean, I feel like I got a late start in so many ways in finding film. I always have been a creative person. I really loved music growing up, and my family are all artists of various levels. And it wasn't until I met my ex-wife that I found filmmaking. She's an actor, and I started visiting sets and realizing that not only did I love the idea of being on set and that there's a team that kind of came together to make something, but I started realizing that maybe I could be a part of that team in my own isolated way, and which is how I found writing. So I started as a writer, and I was on the set of Final Destination 3 of all movies, where the director of that film, Jim Wong, said to me, I think you're going to be more than a writer. I think you're going to direct. And I remember thinking, like, there's no way, I'm not going to be a director. And he's like, no, you're going to direct. And I think it was his, even if it was just him being nice, it was his confidence in me as a person that really made me say, like, wait, why don't I want to direct? If I'm telling the story and I'm writing this thing out and everything, why wouldn't I want to see that through to the end? And so I started focusing on short films years later after getting experience in television rooms. And I had a short that I made in 2013 in 2012 that got into Sundance. And that was the one that kind of opened up the doors for me, and I've been working as a director ever since. I mean, obviously you've got lots of gaps there in between, but whereas all my friends, I feel like, who are in this industry found it early on and made Super 8 films at home and all that stuff, I feel like I was a late bloomer, but I'm glad that I found it.
Quick follow-up question on that. Obviously the short was, and anyone who hasn't seen this short, is called Cub, and it's amazing. It's worth checking out. It's probably going to be the best 5 minutes of your day today. But what inspired you specifically to say, I'm going to make a short film? Was the idea of trying to get into a feature too daunting? Did you want to try something just to see if you could test your hand at it and see if you could do it? Or did someone advise you to do that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, and I forgot the other part of your question, which I guess this relates to, is that I found my process into getting to make movies was practice. And I think that there are people who practice way more than I did, but I definitely wanted to start on a smaller scale. And I'm glad that I did, because I made a few shorts that I don't like very much and I don't think represent me as a filmmaker. But it was the Cub that was the one that I kind of found my voice on. And I feel like that starting smaller, getting bigger sort of thing was my trajectory. And I knew that I wanted to make a feature, but I think it was so daunting in the sense that, like, well, I take that back. I was going to try to make my first feature on my own if I had to, but I really wanted to try to find the right producers to be able to make it in the way that I hoped I could. But yeah, no, I looked at it as a end goal. Like, I used to tell myself if I could make one feature, I'd die happy. Like, I could move on. And it's funny how the next one you go, well, like, it'd be nice to make 2 features. And then now I'm at the end of the third going, like, hopefully maybe I can make this a lifetime thing. So I just took the smallest step I could, which was starting small with a short and working my way up. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily like I have to, like, the next thing that I'm going to do after the Cub is a feature. It just worked out that way, but that was the trajectory that I was going for.
Got it. Thanks, Riley. Joe, tell us about yours.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it a bit later than some. I mean, the same way as Riley. I needed a place back in the day to upload a video while I was going to college, and I looked up free video hosting website, and YouTube was it. So I uploaded it there, and then all of a sudden I started getting comments on it, which was weird to me. Like, who are these people? These aren't people who I sent this to. And I kind of just got hooked on it. And very early on, I decided to try to do something with this YouTube thing back in the day. And everyone had these little characters that they were playing. So I started one called Mystery Guitar Man, which is just fun. And yeah, I started making a lot of videos in that way, you know, whenever I could while I was going to college. And when I realized that I didn't want to be a surgeon, then I said, okay, maybe I want to try this video production thing. I was living around Boston at the time, so I started working, you know, grabbing coffee for people, working on commercials and music videos, and then trying to do some of those things on my own channel. And kind of, you know, I call YouTube my public film school. It's, I post a video up, people comment on it saying, oh, I like it, or this could have been better, and then the next one's better, and the next one's better. And slowly I started working with ad agencies who wanted to start promoting things on bigger YouTube channels. I started getting more and more views. I think we're up to like 350 million views now on all the videos, and almost 3 million subscribers on the YouTube channel. But from there, I was able to move to directing commercials, which is, you know, basically the same thing as I was doing on YouTube. And then from there, music videos. At the time, I think Lady Gaga started a trend of throwing a little short film before, you know, just 2 minutes of a little story before the music starts. And I started doing that to the music videos that I was directing, to the point where the artists, you know, I'd be pitching an idea and an artist would say, okay, I love that. When does the music come in? And I said, oh, okay, I need to stop saddling my artists with this, with these ideas, you know. So I started directing shorts, like Riley. You know, the first one was produced by Ron Howard and Ryan Grazer, and those guys were incredibly helpful. You know, I always waited for the right opportunity. I could have directed shorts before, but I said, okay, now this is the right way to come in, and boom, here's a short film. And you know, the next one was by the creators of The Walking Dead, and we were ready for a feature. From there, we wrote a feature called Stowaway. It all takes place inside of a spaceship headed to Mars. And we said, it's just a matter of, here you go, Hollywood. You just give us the money, and anytime that you're ready, I'll direct it. And turns out that that's a little too ambitious for a first-time filmmaker. So we wrote something a little smaller, called On Mars, which is, you know, a survival story that is in that same world of a man who's stranded on Mars. And then this guy, Ridley Scott, I don't know if you guys, you know, he apparently made a movie that was a little too similar. So we rewrote it. We said, okay,
The Martian.
take the same exact script. Oh, that's it. That's it. Matt Damon, yeah. Right? What a guy. Kind of ruined our idea. So we just took the exact same script and changed it from Mars to another desolate place that's very difficult to live, the Arctic. So we made a movie called Arctic, and from then on, it was, you know, after we got Mads Mikkelsen involved and got to play it at the Kim Film Festival, and while that was going on, you know, XYZ came in and said, what else do you have? And we said, well, we have this other script that nobody wanted to do back then. It's like, well, you didn't have the right people on. So they came in and made it happen for us. So for that, you know, first we attached Anna Kendrick to it, and then Toni Collette, Daniel Day Kim, and now Shamir Anderson. So it's 4 people on a spaceship headed to Mars. So I think mathematically, my first movie was 2, and then 4, I'm guessing 8 for the next movie, or 6, depending on how the math goes. We'll have to see how many people I get to cast next.
Awesome, thanks, Joe. And we're going to drill down a little bit more on a couple of those projects in a minute. But Karin, would love to hear your adventure in terms of just what inspired you to be a filmmaker, and your first steps to start making that happen.
Yeah, I actually probably have a more traditional path in that for me, I wanted to be a filmmaker as a teenager. And at the time, one of the most notable film studies programs was Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. And I managed to go to NYU for film school. And while I was there, I made a lot of short films, and that's really how I wasn't making films as a teenager until I got to college. That was how I had access to equipment and resources. And from there, I stayed in New York City and became an assistant to a really notable independent filmmaker named John Sayles. And I worked for him and then for other filmmakers as an assistant. Probably for about 5 to 7 years while I was also trying to get my first film made. I had made my shorts in college and was ready to make a feature film. So I had a couple of feature scripts, and the one that I just got the most traction with was $1 million indie film about a Latina boxer living in New York called Girl Fight. And so getting that film together took many, many years, the financing. But once I made that film and premiered it at the 2000 Sundance Film Festival, from there I was able to have a lot more opportunities in front of me. From there, I've moved back and forth between studio films and independent films. And that's actually how I met you guys at XYZ. After making 2 studio films, it was really important to me to make something smaller and more contained and more controllable, which is how we made The Invitation together.
And for anyone out there who hasn't seen The Invitation, it's gripping, it's tense, and it's a must watch, I'd say. I'm not even sure what streaming service it's on in Finland, but do try to watch it as your homework after this ASAP, and I think you guys will really enjoy it. Well, okay, Joe, you sort of answered this next question. Karin, I'm going to start with you now. So Girl Fight, just get a little more granular in terms of, for the audience out there, a lot of these folks might be doing similar things to what you're doing, but in Finland, that you guys did, but in Finland. And now maybe they have their script, or they've identified that thing that they want to go make. What would you guys say are the first kind of 1 or 2 crucial steps to actually make Girl Fight, or make Faults, or make Arctic, to actually catalyze that process and actually turn it from dream into reality?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, because I think it's multi-pronged. But for me, I had so much time where the movie came together and fell apart that I was able to really look at the script pretty carefully and continue a process of looking at the script and being sure that, one, that the script was doing everything it could to support the characters in the story, and 2, that there wasn't a tremendous amount of extraneous material that would end up being a waste of time and money when I was dealing with so little time and money to get the film made. So it became the leanest thing it could be. And even now I look at it and I'm like, oh, it could have been even leaner. It's funny how our young creative minds kind of are so certain we need things, and then sometimes we actually don't once they're committed to film. But the number one thing I would say in my case was that I was very clear about the casting, that I knew that the main character needed to look legitimately like she was 18 years old, and absolutely needed to be a person of color, needed to be Latina in this case. And so for years that meant I wasn't going to get the movie made, because there wasn't an environment that supported that decision. But eventually I was able to make the film, but I had to hold out. So it's sort of like figuring out what are the creative foundations of the work that you're making, and are you willing to stick to those, so that you get to make, ideally, the movie you actually want to make.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, you know, in the way that the movie actually came together, it was a lot of it was just luck. You know, it was, you know, same as you, Karen. You know, it was just a matter of things lining up just right. The timing of, you know, we were shooting in Iceland, which is, you know, even more difficult to understand than the Finnish sometimes. You know, and it was just. Yeah, we just had to be very lucky. I happened to have run into somebody who was flying to Iceland that weekend, and they read the script on the plane, and then they handed it to a production company over there who, you know, was able to pull a budget together, and had just done a shoot that was somewhat similar. So yeah, we needed to wait until everything lined up, and kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and try this person, try that person. We brought cupcakes to actors, managers, you know, and they said, thanks for the cupcakes. What, you know, we haven't read your script yet. You know, so I don't recommend bringing cupcakes to actors, managers. It's just a matter of like, yeah, we're waiting for the right opportunity. Directing is constantly about trying to mitigate how many times things don't go the way that you planned. Right, every single day. That's all that it's about, and you want to start with the best foot forward that you can. You know, if we didn't start with an actor who could pull off a mostly silent film by himself, or an actress, you know, we had a few actresses in mind, then my second feature wouldn't have gotten made, because then we would not have gotten any of the interest that we got for the first feature. So and also it was a matter of like, okay, by the time that we had gotten Mads Mikkelsen interested in the film, it was very late in the year. And, you know, with a month of prep, we only had a certain amount of time to shoot. We would have had to shoot about, you know, in 18, 19 days. So it's, hey, do you want to shoot this feature film now in 18 days? Or do you want to wait until next year and try to find a different actor? And Mads might be in a big movie. He just came from 2 big movies. What do you want to do? And we said, let's do it. Let's go for it, and let's try it. You know, because there are certain things that you just have to all of a sudden go for. You have that opportunity right then and there, and okay, fine, it's not ideal. We, you know, we're going to be dealing with melting snow by the end of our shoot, but you know, we have to go for it. Otherwise, the film's never going to get made, or you know, we're going to have to wait another year, and then by then I'm going to have to find a job in the meantime. So it's just a matter of that. So yeah, going down that path, and then, you know, if that is a success, then you have the opportunity to do something a little bit more ambitious for your second project.
Yep. Yep.
There.
Yep. And Riley, how about for you?
I had written a lot of scripts. I guess a lot is relative. For me, I had written probably 6 or 7 scripts before I made any of the short films that I made. And every single one of them, you're like, this is a movie. Somebody's going to want to make this. And then sure enough, nobody wants to make it, or it's too big or whatever it is. And so I took a break from writing features for a little while. I focused on the short film making. And then after The Cub played at Sundance, ended up meeting, I had an idea for Faults, my first feature, going into Sundance, but I hadn't written it yet. I'd outlined it. But coming out of the festival, I met the producers who went on to make the film, Keith and Jess Calder over at Snoot Entertainment. And they enjoyed The Cub, and they said, when you get back to LA, we should meet up, and kind of said maybe in 2 weeks. And so the first day I got back from Sundance, I gave myself a day off because I had just been through the ringer at Sundance and had a great time. But then after that day that I gave myself, I just wrote the entire script for Faults in that 2-week span. Finished it the day before I met with the producers, and basically pitched them the entire thing. And then they said, that's great, when can we read it? And I said, well, I did finish it. Let me just make sure that I didn't have any like punctuation errors, or let me give it to my mom to spell check it for me, because she loves to proofread my stuff. And a couple of days later, I gave them the script. And then a few days after that, they said they wanted to make it. And we were off to the races. So the hardest part of that film was casting our lead. We looked at a lot of people, and at that budget level, a lot of the guys that we were after, because we're looking at maybe mid-40s and older, they just weren't interested, or if they were interested, they wanted to change things about it and make the character stronger. And I wanted the character to be a little weaker. Guys love to be strong on screen. But eventually we found Leland Orser, and I don't believe that there's like one version of any movie that it has to be this way, and like it's got to be with this one actor. I like being able to kind of flow and move with the casting or the location that you shoot a film, but I can't imagine that film being any other way other than the version that Leland is in. And once we had Leland, we were shooting. So I from Sundance to, I want to say like August, was putting the film together, and then we were shooting the last part of that year, and then it ended up premiering at South by. So it was a very truncated, fast moving project, and kind of just was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to direct a feature, and you kind of have to trust that. But I think that I often get people asking me like how they get their script read or how they get their film made. And for me, my biggest advice is to try shorts first, because at the very least, if you make something that shows who you are as a filmmaker, and people can kind of latch onto and say, I can trust this person with the amount of money that I'm going to give them, or I'm going to read this person's script because I liked their short. I do think that it's a very nice way of kind of easing into it, rather than just hoping and praying that somebody's going to read your script, say this is the best thing that's never been made, and then give you $1 million or more to go make something. I think that there's a proof of concept sort of thing working there. And so my whole path, I do recommend people, I guess, especially if you don't have the commercial experience, you don't have the like music videos that you've been making for years, at least try to start making something in a shorter span, or sorry, short form space that shows who you will be if you make a feature. Yeah, long answer, but that was my path.
No, and I think that's a really astute point, and it's one that I really strongly agree with. You know, I look at I've had XYZ for about 13 years now, and so many of the first time feature filmmakers we worked with were filmmakers who had done at least a short beforehand, because there's, number one, the barrier of entry into making a short can be very little. You know, it can cost hundreds of dollars, it can cost thousands of dollars, but it's a completely different beast than making a feature film. And if you can make a strong short film, whether that's 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever, that really demonstrates a voice and really demonstrates technique and all the other things that go into filmmaking, then at that point you already are a director. You know, you've jumped the line, because you've directed something that people can watch, even if it's not a feature film, and get excited about. And so many big working filmmakers today started off with shorts. And so that's for the people watching out there. I would say, if you're trying to figure out that gap between, okay, well, I want to be a filmmaker and I've got these great ideas, but I don't know where to, you know, get $1 million to make a film, or I'm a little intimidated about working with a crew of 50 people and, you know, all these other things, I would definitely say try your hand at a short film. Number one, to make sure that you enjoy the process and the pressure cooker that is directing. And number two, you know, if you can make something that's really singular and outstanding, then you're going to get attention, especially to Joe's point in the YouTube age, where a short film can go viral and really get you noticed by people all over the world, especially in Hollywood as well. So Riley, that's a really, really astute observation, and I think a good one for our guests to be thinking about it if they aren't already. Okay, so last question I'll ask about your first features is, in hindsight, what's the one biggest thing that you'd known going into the process? And it's not even to say like what would you have changed, but if you were about to start now on Girl Fight or Arctic or Faults, what is the one little information bit that you would have wanted given yourself going into it? And why don't we start with Joe on this one?
Yeah, you know, I for Arctic, you know, we had one of the actors that I respect the most in the world. You know, we had Mads freaking Mikkelsen here. And Mads is such a good actor that he is sometimes the only, you know, before I met with him, I spent all night just watching every single movie of his that I hadn't seen yet. And even in films that were just objectively terrible, he's still a great part of it, right? So that must mean that he's not listening to bad directors, but does that mean that he's listening to any directors at all? So I was wondering before I started shooting my first feature, is especially with a respected, beautiful, amazing, talented actor like that, do you just set up the camera, you make sure the little red light is on, and you say, like action, and you go for it, man. You do your thing. And after the very first take, we do something, and I call cut, and I just see his eyes go to my eyes, and it's that same look that I could see in my son after he, draws something that he's wondering if I'm going to be proud of him. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a collaboration, and he wants my opinion. And that's what I wish that I realized a lot sooner, was that it doesn't matter if it's your first feature, your 18th feature, your billionth feature somehow. People are there because they want your opinion, and everyone's got taste. My son's got taste. He's 6. Even people with bad taste have a taste. And bad taste, what does that mean? It doesn't matter. People hired you because they care about what you think. They care about all of that. And it also, to me, I wish that I'd known that it doesn't matter when and in these circumstances, all of the questions that you get as a director are equally important. So, there was one day where there was a massive storm, and we couldn't get to set, and we were literally, 8 hours of shooting behind, which is an entire day. And in an 18 shoot day, that's devastating. And finally, we find a little tiny place right here on the side of the road where we can kind of sort of shoot one of the things. And someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, do you want him holding the blue pen or the red pen?" And I'm like, there is very little in my life right now that I could care less about. But I think the blue pen is going to contrast a little bit better than so like it's that question is as important at that moment as to how are we going to change the movie so that it can work, with the shoot schedule that we now have. So yeah, that's something that I, don't get upset at the little questions.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Karin, what would you tell yourself now, everything you know, all these years later? What would you tell Karin, who's about to direct Girl Fight?
That's a really interesting question, and I hope that some of the answers are things I'm continuing to learn in some way, because I think it's so important to remain a student of the craft. But I would say that, sort of riffing off of what Joe was talking about, I mean, on the one hand, it's very important that you understand how to listen and collaborate and take in good ideas, filter out or refine ideas that don't really align with what it is you want to do. So in other words, it's really important that you be a leader, right, on set. I think I knew that going in. What was interesting was to learn how to be a leader in the process of finishing the film. We really privilege in our conversations about filmmaking, we privilege production itself and shooting. And then when you get into the cutting room, you have all this footage, and suddenly there's a very different, potentially, entity in front of you than maybe the script that you were working off of or the performances you thought you were seeing. And so in some ways, part of what I think I'm relearning with film after film is that once there's a cut of your movie, I feel like you almost have to watch it as if your past relationship with it hasn't happened. So you have to have a very open, non-judgmental, but still constructively critical eye on the film as it's evolving in the cutting room, which I think is a skill that you keep learning, hopefully, and you refine and evolve over time. But understanding how much you have to then deal with what's in front of you and not just try to retrofit it back to the script that you wrote, but deal with what's actually in front of you. What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? And in my case, I wrote a lot of very expository material in the script to help people understand larger emotional relationships. And in the cutting room, I realized 2 looks between characters tell us so much more about the relationship than all of these words. And so I just started having to really pull a lot of dialogue out of the film. And I think getting used to that process is really important, knowing when you can just say goodbye to certain material.
Awesome answer. Awesome answer. Thanks.
Yeah,
Riley.
I was trying to think of that, and I'm glad that I had a little bit of time to think, because both of those answers go along with things that I felt. I think that the hardest thing for me was trusting myself pretty early on, and knowing, because I was thinking about it in my head, I'd only been on set for 4 days as a director before I started my feature, because I'd done 3 shorts. And so 4 days total of being a director, and then all of a sudden you've got 18 days in front of you. I think trusting that I could do it was one thing. I wasn't totally confident, or like I was confident, but you self-guess. And I think we all have to remind ourselves that everyone has imposter syndrome, and I've had it on every single film before I've started. Even on this last one, I'm in a new country, I'm about to shoot a movie, and we're using all this new technology that I've never used, motion control and all this stuff, but everyone's been there and feels that. I think if anything, I went in with too much of a plan. So the first few days, any part of the movie that I know that I shot in that first week, I would even say, I feel like I'm holding back because I've set this shot list in place and I have to now go along with the shot list. And maybe the location is a little different than you expected. Even production design choices that they made, because it's a small movie, they just kind of took the initiative and did something, and you weren't really like seeing it that way. I think I stuck too much to my game plan. And I feel like when I noticed the movie feeling the way that I wanted it to feel, like if I went back and watched it now, it would be all the stuff where I'd sort of kind of relaxed and let myself just find the movie a little bit more. And I'm so set in my ways when it comes to the script and how the dialogue should be spoken. And I definitely have moments where an actor makes a better suggestion and we do it that way. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad they did that. But for being so set in my ways with the script, I find that being more improvisational as a director on set is important to me, and not being so like beholden to the shot list that you've made in your underwear in your living room without the lights burning the actors and the days winding down and you don't have enough daylight. And I would tell myself just to relax and do what's right for the movie rather than what you thought was right when you were in a completely different place.
Awesome. Awesome. Last question I'm going to ask about a first film, just being cognizant of our audience. Each of you have done contained films, and contained doesn't necessarily mean lower budget. In the case of Stowaway, that was a film that was fairly contained, mostly to a spaceship, although it did have a pretty sizable budget. The Invitation, which we did together, Karin, was mostly contained to a house, and Faults, Riley, is a largely contained film. I'd love to know from each of your points of views, for somebody who's about to go make a first film, is there a advantage in your minds to having that controlled environment, or is that not essential to I guess whatever story somebody's going to go try to make first? What are the pros and cons that you guys see of a contained atmosphere? Let's start with Karin.
It's really interesting because I think there is a misunderstanding that a contained film is easier to make. And the fact is, I feel really lucky that by the time I was making The Invitation, it was my 4th feature, and I had enough experience to understand at that point that even though we were only shooting it in 20 days, and it was 19 of those days were in a single house, that the pressure was actually bigger on me to make something where the story, the environment, and the characters are very specific and clear, and that the location itself is something I've really understood on a visual level. And I've understood how to keep it fresh and keep it from becoming kind of visually dead. And so I think the pros of making a movie in largely one place is we were actually able to prep there. So it's like our offices were there. I was able to really map out like what the movie could be in that month of prep before we started shooting. And that was fantastic. And I was able to have real rehearsals like for 3 days in the space before I started officially shooting with my cast. That was incredible. All of that is so important. But the difficulties of shooting in one place is maintaining an aliveness with the location and really understanding that for me, in the case of this film, there were sometimes 12 or 13 people on the screen. You have to understand blocking and framing so that there's still some kind of internal tension driving the storytelling. And so I guess I would say that contained stories are great for their budget level. It's an easy sort of connection to make, but it's actually very challenging creatively, I think.
That's a really good differentiation point, because I would say, and I'm going to hand it off to Joe next, but I would say a lot of people probably, and I certainly see a lot of first-time filmmakers sending scripts and pitches that are selling the idea that, oh, it's all in a basement, or it's all in this, or it's all in that. But while there's budgetary, advantages that come with that, there's a lot of logistical and creative challenges that come with that too. So excellent answer. And honestly, I was kind of hoping for that kind of nuance, because I think it is a good opportunity, but also a warning sign for people out there who are thinking, oh, contained will be my way to get into it. Joe, why don't you talk about your experience on Stowaway?
Yeah, it came from my very first short that started getting a lot of attention, which was all a motion control. Like the entire short is motion control, which is this robotic camera that can repeat its movement over and over and over again, all inside of a dilapidated house. And this lady who may or may not be turning into a zombie, you don't quite know. That was with the creators of The Walking Dead. And from there, I started getting all of the contained scripts, and I found the same issue that Karen, you started running into, which is like, oh my God, this is going to be so boring at a certain point, because you're not utilizing the space in a way that feels fresh and new, that moves into a next level, that helps tell the story in a certain way. And in a way, we found the same issue with Arctic, which was it's all just snow. It's just snow over here, snow over there, snow over there. So it felt very suffocating and contained also. And I remember location scouting, and we would just be driving around like this, all the Icelandic people were used to that kind of thing. But I would just be I was so worried, and all these things that I thought were going to be so great. One actor that I have to worry about the entire time. Well, then, like that, how do I keep that interesting? How do we build on something, but especially with Stowaway, by then I had learned, you're right, I had to learn that it was not a positive thing, that this is all contained. And yeah, it's great for an assistant director who needs to do the shot list. Like, it's like, okay, we're going to move from this room to that room. That's going to be a quick move. It's great for the financier of the film who's like, okay, I only have to pay for one location or build one in a studio. Wonderful, here we go. But it's creatively, it's a huge challenge, and for the actors too. It's like, oh my God, this thing again. There's, they can need some help in pulling out something that's different. Okay, we're still in the same bedroom, but this is now what we're going to do that's different. And then you don't want to go too far with that. You don't want to try to overproduce something, to do something that's different just because it's different, right? And so you start coming up with little tricks, little dogmas for your cinematography. Like, okay, well, the first part here, we're all going to shoot everything on tripods, and it's going to be like there's no one else in the room. And then the second part here, we're going to shoot it all handheld because this is the state of their mind is a little more jumbled at that moment. So you have to do all of these little tricks to compensate for the fact that your setting doesn't change, and hopefully your script is keeping people excited enough to just be looking at the same backgrounds the entire time. That's tough.
Yeah, indeed. And Riley, just quickly weigh in on your thoughts on contained filmmaking.
Yeah, there's not really much more to say. Karen's answer especially I found incredibly similar in the way that I related to shooting faults. Having everything in one place is great. Having all your lights kind of set up and the room's basically pre-lit to a certain extent. All of that saves time. And I think that as a first-time filmmaker, that was great because then I could focus on the performances of the actors. But one thing I did think about as Joe was talking about backgrounds was production design. And I think it's something that people don't think about with contained things enough. But we talked about it early on with my production designer on faults. If we know we're going to be in a room that has basically 4 walls, a motel room, why can't each of those walls look different? So we put different, there's wood paneling on one wall, then one wall has tile because it's closer to the bathroom, and then one wall is this weird wallpaper, and then this other wall has this really obvious contrasty window with air conditioning or a vent on it that's dripping, and so everything about my shots was designed to say, I want this to be about the actors, and it's a stationary movie too. It's not a lot of I think we do handheld twice in the entire film. So I knew it was going to be static and potentially boring to look at. So how do we make the backgrounds feel different every time we're cutting to a new scene? And how does the space feel like it opens up? And how do you reveal this new space? So a thing that you don't go into the bathroom for a long time in the movie, and when you do, all of a sudden it has this pop of color, and that makes the film feel different in its own way. So I think being aware of the fact that, especially if you're in a fortunate position like I was, where we shot on a soundstage for that film, be aware of how the production design is going to affect your contained space in a good way, and how can you use it to your advantage without taking away from the film's, intimacy. So that was something that was very important to us. And I'm very proud of my 27-year-old self for some of the production design choices that he made, because I still look at that movie and I go oh, wow, it looks good. I don't know that a lot of people can say that about their first feature, but our production design is something very proud of.
I'll add a little tidbit there on production design from our own experiences. So one of the first films that we made at XYZ was an Indonesian martial arts action film called The Raid. And it's a film about a task force of 20 police officers who break into a very tall building to try to take out a very bad person who's living at the top of the building. And we had very limited budget, and the 30 or so floor building was actually really just 2 floors. And we were constantly redressing each of those floors, whether it was wallpaper or carpet or hardwood or whatever, doing everything possible to just make it live and feel like you were going through a very different building. It was very much like a video game done in the best way, but those kinds of touches and details, those are the kinds of challenges that you look at on one hand and you say, great, controlled environment, and everything's going to be easy here. And then immediately you start running into, how are we not going to make everything feel samey? We're dealing with a guy who each floor takes on new challenges, but it's kind of more of the same in terms of martial arts. What are we going to do to make this feel like a bigger world and a bigger building and a bigger challenge? And so I think that the production design point is a really good one, Riley, and all these answers have been fantastic. I think for the filmmakers out there who are thinking small, which is good because it's your first film, just realize that there's opportunities and challenges that come with contained. All right, well, moving on from, I'd say, first features or people thinking about first features, a question I have for each of you is, directing is inherently a creative pursuit. So, you know, the three of you are very creative people who, you know, are generating stories, talking to actors, building worlds. At the same time, it's very much a business, right? And Hollywood specifically is a business. The international film business and foreign sales and all that is very much a business too. How do you, in your day-to-day dealings, reconcile those two things? Because to me, it breaks my brain a little bit to think that a filmmaker is about to go do this creative job, which is a lot of pressure and requires a lot of creative focus and ambition, while at the same time, you know, having to think about budget, having to think about casting in terms of maybe I can't get my favorite actor because some other actor is going to unlock the budget that I need. What is your guys' relationship to balancing the creative side of this business with the business side of what's ultimately show business? Let's start with Karin here.
Aram, that's like honestly, that's like a question that the notion of answering it is something I'll take to my grave, because answering it is a process of slowly killing yourself. But I would just say that it is absolutely essential that filmmakers recognize they are in a business and that there are tremendous financial pressures that are coming in from the outside to be on time, to be on budget, to make a profit, to get people paid. There's so many components to the business side of it. But that being said, I've always felt like I wouldn't want to drive a car that was designed by somebody who doesn't design cars for a living. And I don't want to watch a movie made by people who don't know how to make movies for a living either. And definitely there are tons and tons of movies that have the feeling of being put together by some kind of hive mind of speculating about what the audience might want or need, as opposed to feeling something more consistent and unified in the vision. And so I just like to remind myself that I'm hired for a reason, that I'm the director for a reason, that I probably work harder and think longer and dream bigger about the movie I'm making than anybody else in my orbit, even the people I'm working with. That's kind of my job. I have to be the one who wants something bigger than what's on the page. And from there, I think it's really important to pull your partners, your business partners, into that sense of enthusiasm and excitement. And it's really hard. I'm fundamentally kind of shy and interior, and I'm not looking to sort of sell myself. That's just not how I operate. But there is a component of having to show up to the work like with total presentness, total openness, and a willingness and an ability to defend the ideas that you hold most dear about your project. And so that's a lifelong skill to build. I wish I could say there was a formula, but I do think it's really important to sort of see the film business the same way other businesses work, which is there are the people who make the thing, and then there are the people who facilitate that process. And it's very important to know how to communicate with those people who facilitate while also remaining the person who can make the thing with total presentness and a sense of being very open and alive to the process.
Excellent answer. And when you were talking about the building the car thing, it reminded me of, there was a car in the 50s called the Ford Edsel. And it was a massive failure because the idea at the time was that they were going to try to make a car for everybody. And it was the ultimate too many cooks in the kitchen, you know, where the designer was trying to make one car, you know, some of the other folks were thinking, okay, well, we'll make this for a certain kind of demographic. And they actually thought we're going to put everything together to make a car that everybody's going to want. And it ended up being a car that nobody wanted. And I think that that often happens in filmmaking, and especially in Hollywood filmmaking, where, you know, the filmmaker wants to make a film, the producers want to make a film, the studio execs want to make a film, everybody has, the
And there are
marketing
different
folks
films.
want to make a film. Yeah, and they're different films, and it ends up being a hodgepodge that is meant to be for everybody and ends up not being for anybody. So, you know, I think the car comparison is really apt, and there's actually true stories of that actually happening in the automotive business. So really interesting. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, what I've been learning is the mark of a good director is to be able to put yourself into different shoes at any moment, right? Into this actor's or this character's shoes, and say, okay, what would that person be thinking about? And also a good writer, right? You know, what would this person be thinking? Why are they doing this thing? Why is this person stabbing this other person with a knife? Oh, okay, because of this and this and that, you know, or why is that happening? Why is that happening? And to be able to do that multiple times in a scene, you know, especially in a discussion, an argument, you have to see things from both sides, and you kind of have to be a mediator at all times. And what I've been learning, and yeah, constantly still trying to figure that out, you know, is that you have to do that with other aspects of filmmaking too. What does a financier want? You know, like put myself in their shoes. They just want to make the money back. They want to make a movie that has a trailer that everyone's going to want to see, and they want to put as much of the cool shit into the trailer, so it doesn't matter if it spoils the whole movie, as long as people pay for it to go take the seat in the theater, or people click on it online and rent it online, and then great, wonderful. Okay, yeah, you know, if there is other stuff that comes out of that, amazing, you know. But that's what they want. What does the AD want? You know, the assistant director just wants to make their day. What does the producer want? What does the line producer want? You know, so you constantly have to be like, okay, why is this person yelling at me? Oh, because I was supposed to do this or that other thing, or because I told them that I wanted 50 horses and now I'm asking for 500. You know, so as long as you can do that, you can mitigate a lot of pain on set, and you can be that mediator. And you know, there is the approach of the, you know, artists, and you know, you're going to never do anything possible, but you know, like a Charlie Kaufman-esque kind of person. But I bet you if Charlie Kaufman were here, he'd say, oh yeah, no, I'm constantly changing things around in order to make things work, to make my day work, to make the budget work, to, you know, I was going to do something even crazier, but you know, I had to kind of hold it back in order to make the film a little bit more accessible. You know, you have to, you know, Karan, the same kind of thing that you were talking about, where you started removing a bunch of lines. I had to do the opposite, because I like to write as little dialogue as possible. I just don't like to hit the dialogue button on my keyboard for some reason. And I was doing the opposite. I was adding in ADR lines to help clarify some of these points in Stowaway, because it's really, really hard. And when you're entrenched into it, and so sometimes you make missteps, but I feel like, and this is something that I learned while doing commercials, which is just like, you do what the brand wants. And if they want that type of red, I mean, that's very important for them and you have to. But where can I be creative, and where can I put my mark and my stamp into something that is not something that is a non-negotiable for someone else?
Great.
Yeah.
Riley.
It's harder and harder to think of things that haven't been said already, because the answers
you'll get to answer the next question first. How about that?
But I did think of two things, and I'll be quick with both. The first thing is, I think that there are a lot of people who get into directing who, some of their favorite directors are the auteurs who say, like, I don't make this movie for anybody but myself. I don't care if anybody else likes it. I made it for me. And I think that there's a danger in that way of thinking, because I think at the end of the day, you will have people that are going to like it and like that you made difficult and weird choices and choices that are challenging. But I think that mentality of this is just for me, as opposed to saying, like Karan said, it is a business at the end of the day. I think that it's important to still say, I want other people to see this. I want my financiers to make their money back, because then they're going to want to work with me again. And I'm going to get to make something else. And if you're so dead set on making something that nobody likes but you, I think that that's a danger. The other thing I'd say too is kind of touching on what Arm was talking about a little bit is partnering with people who are like-minded. And so like, I'll be candid, with working with XYZ has kind of been the best experience I've had working on a movie so far. And it's because we all have been on the same page from day one. Literally, once they read the script, they were like, we are on whatever this is, we want it. And there were other producers who wanted changes or would have asked for certain casting choices to be made that I think went against the movie. And so right now, even just something as simple as I'm so used to giving a little because I might need to take a little down the line in terms of some creative thing that I ask. And so right now we're working on trailers and poster stuff. And recently was a conversation about like, well, financiers might like this choice in a trailer better, but creatively we all like this choice better. And I'm so used to being like, okay, I got to give a little bit to the financial side of things, but I also really like this version better for what it does for the movie. And I've never been in a position where I start to say that, and then before I even reply to an email, Arm's like, let's just do both. Let's have a trailer that's for the financial people, and then like they can have their fun and like there's action in it and everything. And then let's make our trailer that says what we want to say. And so I'm so, I mean, even the poster situation that we had recently where there's one poster that looks better in terms of like, how's that going to pop in a megaplex? And then there's another trailer that looks like it'd work better at an ArcLight, like an indie theater. And Aram immediately was just like, let's do both. And I think that that's the sign of working with people who get what you're going for. And so whereas it's a business, the business side of things too, still like the business people, and I know that Arm's a creative producer as well, but there's a business behind XYZ. They still are on the same page and want what I want. And so it's partnering with the right minds, the people that get what you want and are after the things that you're after.
Riley, thanks for the kind words. I'll send you the check in the mail right after this panel. Okay, so this is a really interesting one for our audience. You guys have all worked with big cast, big actors, like household names. Okay, so in the case of Joe, Mads Mikkelsen, Anna Kendrick, Toni Collette. In the case of Karin, Charlize Theron, Nicole Kidman, others. In the case of Riley, Aaron Paul, Karen Gillan, and others. How do you, and this is not a fishing expedition because I don't want to hear anything sensitive or specific to those experiences. It's more about the approach. How do you go into that movie knowing I'm working with somebody who's a household name, I'm working with somebody who is a movie star? How do you treat that? Is it just telling yourself, you know what, this is an actor, I'm going to talk to this actor the same way I talk to any other actor? Is there prep that goes into specifically the how you're going to approach them and deal with them with that dynamic, or do you try not to think about it and just approach it like you would anybody else? Riley, let's have you go first because you keep getting the third end of the stick here.
It's fun to think about things that I wouldn't normally think to say, but no, I'll totally take this first. The thing that I would say is making sure you have conversations with people ahead of time and know what they're like as people. And I mean, I'm guilty of just being like, I don't care how famous you are. If you're not a good person, I don't really want to work with you. And I feel like at some point there's going to be exceptions to that rule where I say this personality is perfect for the role and we'll figure out our working relationship and stuff. But I think it's preparedness going into a movie, having those meetings, discussing what you're after as an actor. I want to be able to facilitate that as a director too, a working relationship that they feel comfortable with. But I think it's getting easier in a sense for me now being on the third feature where actors are coming in and they're familiar with the other movies. So they are on board for what those are and what that tone is. I mean, this isn't sensitive, and Karen, I don't think would mind me saying that we talked about how on The Art of Self-Defense, Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots, both by the end of it were just like, can we have a line reading on this specific line? And I would preface with, I'm not an actor, but if I were to say it, it would sound something like this. And then they take it and put it through their actor brain and turn it into something way better. And I told that to Karen, and she goes, oh, I don't do line readings. Like, I don't need that, but thank you. And I'm like, totally fine, totally part of the process. By day 3, she was asking for line readings. And by the end of it, she was like, I love line readings now, because I think there's this thing where you think it's somebody telling you exactly how to do it. And I like to think of it more as it's in this world. And this is, since I wrote it too, it's in this world. And now you take it and you make it better than what I could ever do, because that's not something I would be able to do. So I think it's just getting to know people as people if you were able to before you start a production. And I know that's easier said than done. And some actors maybe like the disconnect a little bit, and it depends on the project. But I've been fortunate to be able to have meetings ahead of time, or phone calls in the case of Bulik Wale coming into Duel, and just kind of say, are you a good person? Yeah, I'm a good person. All right, let's work together. So
nice. Karin.
Again, I think every actor is different, so I can't say that there's like necessarily like formulas beyond treating people with kindness and respect, believing in their talent, and being open about that, and recognizing that with a few exceptions where I'm sure there's like an older actor, for instance, who's sort of seen it all, done it all, and maybe doesn't need you to project this. Most actors want you as the director to still be a leader. And I'm like, I think that story that Joe told about Mads is so instructive, because in the end, no matter how good an actor is, they don't work in a vacuum. Like if they were an actor without an audience, I think that would be some kind of psychosis. So in a way, it's really important to give feedback when it feels like feedback is necessary, to give encouragement and support when it's necessary. And I think the number one thing for me is that actors, I've learned over the years, actors for their job, and oftentimes the better they are, the more they live in this highly exposed, highly vulnerable space. And it's really important to say to your actor, I recognize how vulnerable it is that you do what you do, and I'm going to protect that for you so that you feel seen and safe and respected in the process. So it's still a process for me to learn doing all of those things. And when directing asks so much of you beyond your relationship to the actors, but I would say if your relationship to the actors is not positive, it doesn't really matter how good of a director you are, because your performances are going to be just torture to get to.
Excellent point. Thank you. And Joe, talk about your experiences.
What both of you are saying, I was just remembering bits of my own experience. And I haven't worked with that many actors, but the majority of the ones that I've worked for feature films are, have Oscar nominations and, have all of this acclaim and this repertoire, and, so it can be a little daunting. And people often ask me like, oh, are you worried about working with these names? And I have found that, with the short films that I've made and the commercials that I've made, that I'm actually worried about the opposite, because these people are there for a reason, right? They're there because they can tap into something really well. They're artisans. They can mold clay in a certain way, and it's just a matter of figuring out how, right? So line readings, like you're talking about, Riley. It's same thing with Mads. Sometimes you're trying to talk as a director. You're told like, okay, it doesn't matter what you do with directing. Directing is whatever, but just don't give people line readings. Don't say like, I want you to go now. You're never supposed to do that. But yeah, day 3 with Arctic, I was trying to like talk around like, okay, so the way he speaks is like, so he's not that angry, but he's also not super not angry. And he's like, oh, how would you say it? I'm like, you want me to say it? He's like, yeah. I'd say like this. And then he's like, oh, okay, got it. And yeah, of course they can make it 600 times better. So, sometimes when you just have to learn. And I know that for some other actors that I work with, if I were to just say the line, they would And sometimes I tried it and it didn't work, you know. And sometimes what an actor needs in between crying takes is to, you know, just smoke a cigarette and I go up to them and tell them some jokes, and they just need to, you know, forget about the fact that they were crying. And sometimes they need to stay in that. And so I totally understand why some directors always work with the same person and always work with the same actor, the same cast. It's because you start learning. By the end of the shoot, you say, oh my gosh, I would have done like this thing different, that thing different. And you also start learning, okay, this person needs a few takes to warm up, and that person is best on the first take, and they start kind of losing it. So, you know, you talk to your assistant director and you say, okay, we're going to shoot the wide first, and then we're going to go into this person, and then we're going to go to that person. You know, so it's all a learning experience, and it's a bit like, you know, I suppose like playing a sport where every ball that comes to you is different, right? And every situation that you're in is a bit different, but yeah, you start getting into enough situations and you start learning, okay, I think I understand this person. I think I get that. And yeah, it's surprising. It doesn't matter the level, how much there's nervousness around that first meeting, you know, when you're sitting down with Toni Collette or with Anna Kendrick or with Mads Mikkelsen, everyone's like, are we all normal here? Are we all kind of cool? Is this okay? Is this all right? And when you start just having a conversation with someone's like, oh, okay. That, and, you know, reputations that precede people. I mean, they will have heard something about you. You will have heard something about them. Could be stories, could just be a bad day, could be wonderful things. It's different every time.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. So a few great group questions, a few specific questions relating to each of your individual experiences. Karin, I'll start with you. You've had a very successful and varied film career, but you've also been directing TV. And I just wanted to hear from you a little bit about your experience on TV versus film, if you have a preference, and just what people out there who are, you know, about to do one or the other or both should know.
Yeah. I mean, I think they both require the same skill set in that you're dealing with a ton of people. You're still having to answer one creative question after another. You're having to think about time and how to manage it. And you have to still develop, even in television, relationships with your actors. I mean, I think it's still a really key component of directing television. I like to think of them as, you know, it's like they're both, they're the same kind of motion, but they're different forms. So one thing is sprint training and the other thing is training for a marathon or running a marathon, you know. So feature films, the prep is longer, the shooting is longer, the post is much, much longer, and you have to have a different kind of stamina for it. You have to understand how to take care of yourself. I mean, it's really like, over the years, I've just learned how much filmmaking can sort of destroy your mind and body if you're not really paying attention to keeping yourself healthy, you know, literally healthy in mind and body. Television is just faster. It's a faster prep, it's a faster shoot time. And then oftentimes, you know, less than a week of cutting an hour of television. So I look at the television work for me as a really cool, interesting, creative way to stay sharp and to be thinking in terms of potentially other formerly established aesthetic demands. Working within that framework can be very interesting and challenging. Whereas to me, making features is sort of more like an expression for me of a bigger creative goal or bigger creative ambition. But I love them both, and I hope I get to keep doing both things.
Excellent. Thank you. You're definitely going to be continuing to do both things. There's no doubt about that. And we're all looking forward to seeing them. So Joe, a lot of our guests are in Finland and would be hoping to, or planning to, or already are planning to come to the United States to start their careers or continue their careers. You were born in Brazil. talk a little bit about your international experience on any level that you want to talk about, but just coming to America and becoming a filmmaker, and any experiences or advice that you'd want to impart.
Yeah, I figured that there wasn't going to be a difference between my culture in Brazil and the culture here in America, because I had seen enough movies, and it's a Western country in Brazil enough. It's just going up a little bit, but no, I literally was sick for 3 months because the food that I was eating here was too different from what I was eating in Brazil. So it took me a while to figure that out, that it was the food. And it is different, and there is a bit of especially in the industry, I've found. I've shot a few things in Brazil, but smaller projects, and the film industry there seems a little bit more gregarious, a little bit more like, okay, everyone's going to help each other out, whereas here it's a little bit like, well, don't do that, you're going to be stepping on my toes. And I've found that there's a difference between shooting in New York and in LA, shooting in LA versus Iceland versus Germany, where we shot Stowaway. So it's it's something where as a director you need to be adaptable anyway. So being adaptable to the industry here in the United States is really important. But the fact that I was losing something in trying to assimilate as much as possible. For a long time, I didn't speak any Portuguese. I wouldn't tell people I was Brazilian. I changed my name from Jonatas to Joe, because it's just easier. And that's the most American version of Jonatas that I could think of. I still will keep the Joe around because Jonatas is, I get too many people saying Joe Cohantas for some reason. That's where they go.
You should have never told me. You should have never told me that, and that's your new nickname.
That's my new nickname, is Joe Cohantas. And don't. Yeah, of course, try to work within the constraints of the American system. But the fact that you are foreign and that you are bringing this Finnish twist to it, or this Brazilian twist to it, or whatever it may be, that's actually interesting to a lot of people. Oh, this is different than the 18 other people that I saw before this person. Don't lose it. When I started connecting to my Brazilian roots again, even on my YouTube videos and the commercials that I was making, throwing a little Easter egg that only the Brazilian people are going to get. That also works for audiences that aren't getting that. They know that they can feel that there's something there that's a little different. It's a little bit more of like, oh, okay, that's some sort of something, and it becomes a little puzzle for people. Weird to speak about a nationality in that way, and something that's so basic for you. So yeah, assimilate in some ways, but be steadfast and strong in your ways in others. That doesn't say much, but I couldn't say something.
No, I couldn't agree with that more. And on the XYZ side, we work with so many international filmmakers, and granted, what we focus on technically is more independent film, which allows for, I'd say, more bandwidth or flexibility to have a point of view. But what we're looking for are people with points of view and a particular way of seeing the world, and everything that's been downloaded into your brain, whether you're coming from Finland or Brazil or wherever, is making you a unique human being. And we want to see that, at least on the XYZ side, we want to see that on screen. We want to see that reflected in the way you see the world and the way you tell what you see in the world. So whether that's a English language film or not, I think that it's really important. There is a lot of pressure in Hollywood to be the same, and it's often a race to the middle, which can make things challenging because everybody wants a Ridley Scott film, but there's only one Ridley Scott. So what I would say, my little one piece of advice here would be, don't try to just go make a Ridley Scott film. Make the film that reflects your upbringing and your experience and your worldview, because that's ultimately what's going to stand out and give you a signature as a filmmaker. So just to switch gears, Riley, you are you have the amazing distinction of being the director who made the first American film shot entirely in Finland. And I'm sure our audience would love to hear a little bit more. It's the opposite of, many of them will be looking to come to America and make films here. Talk about your experience going there. So number one, being a fish out of water and making a film in a different country, but then also specifically, what did you see in your experience shooting in Finland that as an outsider, you could pass along to Finnish filmmakers who might be taking certain things for granted?
So many things come to mind. I think initially, I mean, the way that we ended up in Finland was obviously because of COVID protocols. The idea of shooting something in the States or in Canada was open, but there were going to be too many hoops to jump through. And at the time when we were looking, Finland's numbers were very low and things had been handled in a way that was, at least on paper, better than we handled them in the United States. And one of our producers, Nate Balatin, made the suggestion via phone call with me one day, what would you think of Finland? Because we had some of our financiers out of that country. And I think there was talk at XYZ that I was probably gonna be a little bit opposed to it, but immediately just thought that it was a great idea, not only for production and our safety and the cast safety, but also I just love what it offered us in terms of the location, in terms of the look and the feel, and it feels very much like its own world in regards to the way that we use it in the film. But we've talked a lot about how you have to be able to adapt and roll with the punches, and I definitely feel that in the way that we shot this movie. So it was never conceived to be shot in Finland. So going there and actually saying, okay, we're going to do it, we're going to dive straight into it, and we're going to not try to make it something it's not. We're going to embrace the country for what it is. And like just something as simple as every single outlet looks different than the outlets in the States. And there would be people who would come in and be like, oh, this doesn't work because there's all these European outlets everywhere. And instead, for me, I was just like, all right, cool, that's part of the movie now. Like we're just going to embrace the country for what it is and use it to our advantage and create this world. But yeah, I think as an overall, we all had the best experience shooting there. We found that the crews were, I mean, the people were on our crew were the best of the best in the country. And I think that there is a lot of up and coming talent, and it seems like XYZ is going a long way to ensure that that talent continues to be cultivated and can get opportunities in the industry. And I do think that it's on its way up. I think that people shoot in Estonia and Sweden and countries around there and kind of take Finland, either, I guess not take it for granted, they don't really think of it, but I think that that's going to change. And it just takes more productions being shot there. It takes the country itself, I guess, bringing in people from other countries and other productions. But yeah, I loved it. And I think that in terms of the look of the country, you guys are very, very lucky that that's the country that you live in, because there's beautiful parts of our country for sure, but I just was really captivated with Finland, and I think it looks beautiful on film. And the overcast skies, I mean, for a science fiction film or a horror film or whatever you want to go for, like the skies definitely give you something that we don't necessarily have here in Los Angeles. So yeah, it was the best.
Thanks, Riley. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to ask you guys one more group question, which I think is really interesting, and then I'll ask a couple audience questions before we wrap up. So something I'm really interested and curious about hearing about is we've all been doing this for a while, and the landscape of distribution has changed drastically. And primarily I'm talking about the emergence of streamers and how, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and a lot of global and international streamers have really emerged in the driver's seat, or are dominating the marketplace. How has that, less about your opinions on that, because it kind of just is what it is, but more about how has that impacted your thinking when you go about telling a story, knowing that with a theatrical experience, people are paying $20 or whatever, they're driving their car or doing whatever to make a night out of it. So they're in that theater for 2 hours. It's very unlikely that they're going to check out. Whereas with streamers, you know, it's one click away from saying, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to watch something else, for better or worse, you know, and the answer might be that's their problem, not mine. But I'd love to hear from you guys when you know that something is either being made for a streamer or at some point downstream is going to be seen by lots of people on a streamer. Does that affect your approach to storytelling in any way? Let's start with Karin.
You know, I'm probably a little bit older than Joe and Riley. So for me, you know, the theatrical experience is how I have absorbed and digested and learned about film. I think the presence of the ever presence now of streamers has just demanded that I think a little bit more expansively about what kind of stories I want to tell. And am I willing, for instance, to commit to, say, a limited series, say 6 full hours or 8 full hours of making something, you know, of storytelling. And I haven't yet made a feature for a streamer. I remain pretty focused on how I can make features that are seen in a theatrical environment, but that may change, of course. And so I think, if anything, the shifting landscape of how people watch things, it just demands that I become more resilient and adaptable. But in terms of how I tell certain stories, I mean, there's certain stories that I know are going to be hard to make for theatrical and hard to make for a streaming audience. I would rather find something that organically, to your point about a sort of diminished attention span, I'd rather find something that organically might engage audiences in a really dynamic and fast way than retrofit something to become that for this sort of faceless streaming audience with no attention span. I have to believe that there's more there in the audience, more tolerance for the work, and I might lose people because of that. I recognize that, so I have to just be adaptable.
Great, thank you. Joe, why don't you speak next? And you just had a film that premiered on Netflix and was in Netflix mostly all over the world, in Stowaway.
Yeah, I'm. You might think I'm younger, but I'm actually 73 years old. I just eat a lot of finished reindeer shavings.
You look amazing, Joe. You look amazing.
Thank you.
You're carrying it well.
It's those reindeer shavings. But I've had a lot of experience in switching mediums. So going from YouTube, where you better hook them in the first 5 seconds, otherwise they're clicking away. And then commercial, which is kind of a similar approach. Music video, where you have a little bit of more time, or going into, and then going into a feature film where, it's 90 minutes, it's 120 minutes. I think it's important to know beforehand that your film is going to be theatrically released, or if your film is going to be a Netflix originals. But I'm learning with Stowaway. I think it's all about expectations, setting the audience expectations. So Riley was talking about the trailer. If you give everything away in the trailer, then people are going to think that your movie's boring. If you just set up your trailer just in the right way, then maybe that's okay. And with the knowledge that people are going to watch your movie anyway, in Blu-ray, people are going to watch your movie on iTunes, it's going to end up on Amazon Prime or Netflix or something, so it doesn't matter. People are going to watch your film in the streaming sense. They're just going to steal it sometimes, so they're going to stream your film anyway. So knowing that a large part of your audience is going to watch it that way, then being cognizant of that and watching your film in that way. While we were finishing Stowaway, the best way that we figured out that the colors, to color correct the film instead of, we tried renting theaters, but that wasn't working out well. We ended up just doing some of it that way, but then some of it just on an iPad, because it was just, we both knew that we had the same kind of iPad and the screen was going to look the same. So a lot of the color correction film happened there. So I started realizing, okay, when people watch it in this way, in a smaller screen, sure, I was kind of, closer in pretending that it was a theater and, darkening out the whole room, but then that changes how people experience your film. And that might change everything. That might change the cut, that might change the music, that might change the pace of your film. And yeah, as a filmmaker, I think that, you want to give as much time as you can to each story beat, but knowing that the audience is smarter than that, you can move faster than that, you don't have to explain everything, knowing that that's the style, then if somebody can be pulling out their phone without bugging the people behind them, maybe just do that a little bit more if you're going to be streaming it, or a little bit less if you're going to be going in a theatrical sense. But I wonder if one day we're gonna get to two different mediums, one where it's the theatrical release film and one where it's the Netflix streaming movie, because that's what happened with plays and musicals and TV and radio plays becoming podcasts. And, they got divergent enough. If that's our evolution, or if still we're gonna have the same kind of it's a feature film, but it just plays in both ways. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Indeed. And Riley, your thoughts on streaming versus theatrical and how you approach it in your storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, like Karin, I've not made a feature specifically for streaming, but I do agree with what she said, where I don't think it would affect the film itself that I made. I would hope not. I think more so it would be, like she said, you would want it to feel like it's organically suited to streaming. I think trying to fit the square peg into a round hole sort of thing is apt here, where if you're trying to make something that's super quiet, that I don't know, and you're putting it on Netflix and you expect tons of people to just come at it and then it's going to last for the rest of the year and people are going to be talking about it, I think that sometimes that can be bad for a film. But I do think that there's it's obviously we're going towards where everything's kind of just going to be released that way, and I'm not opposed to it. I like watching movies that first weekend, but I think that just kind of taking it and saying oh, this is going to change the way that this movie is made or the way that I would go about it. I don't know that would be the case for me, but yeah, I don't know. Who's to say? I've not crossed that bridge yet. So, but as an audience member, I just know that if I go to a theater, I'm going to be there. I'm not pulling out my phone. I'm not looking at other things. I'm not having conversations with people as the movie's playing. And I think that there's something really nice about that. And I think that I want to make things for that ideal scenario. I'm coloring in a theater because I'm hoping that it's going to be playing theatrically. But then I also, as a director, have to kind of say, once I've made the movie and it gets released, you have to be okay that people have got motion blur on their TV, and you've got to be okay with the fact that they're going to be watching an iPhone. And I also watch a movie on my iPhone here and there, or if you're on a plane, or it's going to be on this little tiny, horribly pixelated screen. And I think that just being okay as a director of saying, once it's out in the world, it is what it is. That's important to me. But yeah, trying to make things for that theatrical experience is the ideal scenario.
There's also technology that's changing, right? Like you're talking about motion smoothing on TVs and things like that. We're going to get to a point where TVs are cheap and people get bigger TVs. A lot of us probably have those because it's okay, I want to watch something bigger and I want to be able to, watch it down, and you get the color just right. Eventually, it's going to be to the point where there's a little flag attached to the video file, and it's going to say, hey, turn all of these things that make your movie look bad off. And pretty much the way that the filmmaker experienced it and created it is going to be how people experience it, hopefully.
I hope so.
But yeah, but still,
I hope
the
so
problem
too.
is this, right? The problem is that people,
the motion blurring especially breaks my heart, I got to say.
Yeah, I think it's Ryan Johnson who's trying to like have it be not the automatic, like the default, and they're actually working with the TV manufacturers, but they sell the TVs with that. So anyway, that's another conversation, obviously.
So we're over time. I'm just going to ask the last question, which I thought was a great and very Finnish audience question. Finns are known for being very pragmatic. So one of the questions that came through was, when, and I know all three of you are very resilient, so I'm very curious for your answers, but the question was, when do you know it's time to give up on your project? You've been trying to get this project made. You feel like you've knocked on all the doors. You believe in it deeply. You have all the conviction in the world that you're going to make something special, but the marketplace is telling you no. When do you give up? Do you give up? Do you figure out another way to come at it? What is the what's the thought process that goes into, okay, I'm getting a whole lot of no's. What am I going to do here to either move on or move forward with this? Let's start with Riley on this one.
I haven't been in that position just yet. All three of the current sort of this part of my career where I've made the short that has led to the features, I've made the scripts kind of in order of the way that I've written them. But if I do think that if I got to that place where I wrote something that for some reason wasn't coming together and I've heard no and no and no, I think that it's not really a matter of giving up. It's let's set this aside for the time being, and maybe there's a way of coming back to it later on. And if I've done something else feature-wise and made this other thing, do I still want to go back to it? Does it feel like me anymore? Because I feel like for me, writing and filmmaking is so much about who I am kind of at this point in time, give or take a few years, or I guess take a few years. So like the current thing that I'm working on is what I care about. And at some point, maybe I wouldn't want to make that movie. So yeah, for me, it would probably be just maybe it's just not the right thing for this point in time. I can always come back to it. It's not like you have to burn your script.
Right. Karin.
I mean, it's so interesting because I've now been doing this long enough that I have so many projects I've had to say not goodbye to, but sort of just recognize the time wasn't right and that movie is probably not happening. So at this point now, movies and television series, and I've come to a certain kind of peace with the idea that I might be developing 10, 12 projects in a very active way. And if I'm lucky, one of them gets made. I mean, that's just sort of the brutal truth of this business. I think the number one thing is when do you lose interest in it? Like, when is it no longer fun? Because the number one thing about this business and this art form is that the positive experience of it has to come from the process of it. You cannot control the outcome of how people receive your film, if it gets seen, if it gets released the way you want it to be released. There's so many things that are out of your control that the one thing you do have control over is this process engaging and fun for you? And if it's not, I always say that's when you walk away, because it's just too hard to be in this business if you're not having fun just putting one step in front of the other. So that's kind of how that's my litmus, is like, is this becoming less fun than more fun to keep banging my head against the wall,
Great point. If you're going to bang your head against the wall, you want to make sure
that it's somehow crazily perversely fun.
Yes, that somehow there's something great on the other side of this.
Yes.
And Joe, your 2 cents on this?
Yeah, that's good to hear from you, Riley, too, about burning scripts. I've been burning all my scripts. I think that's not really I print them out and then I burn them. It's a bad idea. I should have just deleted them.
Computer, man. Come back to
it's not good for the environment either.
Yeah, it's super bad. But you're right. That you need to have fun, while doing this, and you need to be. There are moves that you make for your career and you get attached to projects just because they have a household name on it, but then that project falls away, or you really wanted a certain project, but then at that studio the person who was championing a project gets fired, and then their boss comes in and fires every single other person, and somehow you think that you might be able to hold on to that, and you just don't know. You know, there. I think as long as you're finding some creative fulfillment in what you're doing, then keep it going. But you know, sometimes there are projects that you just give up. You know, there's entire scripts that I've written that I don't even know where they are. You know, it's like I'm just going to delete them because it's not something that is creatively fulfilling to me anymore. You know, because I have learned so much from these projects that I've done that I go back to it. I'm like, oh, you know what? I've done versions of this already, or this wasn't done as well as I thought that it was at the time when I was just learning how to do this kind of thing, or you know, this is too similar to another project that's already been done. So, you know, conceptually, can I change this? And if I can't, it loses what was interesting about it to me, then it goes away. And, you know, maybe it comes back years later, or it comes back something, you know, as a different iteration, or maybe you start picking it apart. You know, we're scavengers as writers and as directors. You know, it's like, oh, you know what? I like this one idea, this one shot from this one film. I'm going to steal that. Or I'm going to take the character name is something that I've used from old scripts that were entire feature-length scripts. I just like the name of the character, and I'll change it if that ever becomes a movie. But you know, for me, I had to give up my entire career on YouTube because of external, you know, reasons. YouTube just changed as a platform where I couldn't keep going. So slowly, I had to decide I'm going to stop being a YouTuber and I need to start becoming a filmmaker here on this other side. So sometimes it's external and it's clear, but sometimes, you know, you just keep trudging along and then you realize, you look back and you realize you haven't moved that far. And yeah, you know, maybe you're pushing on the wrong thing, and maybe it's not as good as you thought, or maybe it's something where if you were to change what you're trying to push in a certain way to be more personal or to be more relevant for the world, maybe you go further with it.
Great thoughts. And I mean, the last thing I'll add in here from a producing point of view is producers don't like to give up. And we certainly don't like to give up. And what I would say is that some of the hardest films to get made for us ended up being by far the best films that we got made. So, you know, one example that comes to mind is a film in 2008, when we started XYZ Films, we wanted to tell the story of John DeLorean, who was a car automaker who built his own car, and, you know, everything crashed and burned, and he ended up getting arrested for cocaine trafficking in an attempt to money launder to save his own company. And, you know, as three young guys starting a company, we thought, hey, this is a really cool story. This has got to get made. We're going to be the ones to tell it. And over the years, you know, all of a sudden, George Clooney was attached to a competitive project and we were dead in the water. Brett Ratner, when Brett Ratner was in a different kind of situation, was going to do a project. And all of a sudden, we were dead in the water. We were at the bottom of the, you know, ladder in terms of being able to get our film made. And, you know, so many different things happened that made that film hard to make, but to Karin's point, we never lost the passion or the interest, and, you know, we continued banging our head against the wall and trying to find different and fresh ways to come at it. And I'm happy to say 10 years later, we were able to get it made as a documentary narrative hybrid. So we ended up making it as a doc with scripted reenactment scenes with Alec Baldwin playing John DeLorean. And of those competitive projects from, you know, 10 years before, we were the only ones who ultimately got to see the light of day with ours. And it just took, I think, perseverance and resilience, but also getting creative, you know, realizing that there's other ways to tell this story. And I think ultimately we ended up making a better version of that story by just adapting. And another example Karin knows really well was The Invitation, which took longer than it should have taken. You know, there was a casting carousel, there was different financiers coming and going, there were different production plans and budgets that were at odds with each other. But, you know, we continued to see that there was a great film here that nobody wanted to give up on. And we continued to just like push and push and push until we ended up getting what I would say is the perfect cast and the perfect setting and the perfect opportunity. And I'm really now proud to say that it's one of the, if not the most celebrated film in our XYZ library. So for everybody out there, I would say that if you believe in the story, to what all our filmmakers said, obviously listen to what the market has to say. Listen to, if people are saying no, listen to why they're saying no and try to figure out, where they're right and where maybe they're not right. But where they are, adapt a little bit, be flexible, make changes. And ultimately, in our business, you're going to hear 99 no's before you hear one yes. But really, it's just about getting to that one yes. And it's really, how many of those no's can you take before you hear that yes? And once you get to that yes, you're making a film. So on that note, I know we're about 15 minutes over time. Karin, Riley, Joe, thank you so much for your insights and for sharing your time. It's been really great having you guys as guests. Thanks again to Business Tampere, Film Tampere, Oulu, and Helsinki for allowing this platform to happen. I really hope it was helpful for all you audience and guests out there, and that we got to answer questions and guide you in some small way. And we look forward to seeing and hearing about your work in the future.
Thanks so much, Darren. It's really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.